Welcome to the EMT Pro podcast, where we deliver relevant EMS content from the field and the classroom each week. Episodes of this podcast can get you 1 full hour of CE through our partner, emt-ce.com, so head over there for more information. I'm your host, Steve Williams, and with me is Dan and Holly. Guys, say hello.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Good to see you. Good to have you. We have a fun episode, which is kind of built off of another episode we recently did with human trafficking with Chad.
Oh, sorry.
With Chad from, who's a police officer dedicated 40-hour human trafficking is the only cases he works. So from
he's
that,
the only one, right?
he's the
only full-time.
I think he's the only dude.
Yeah.
So
for the entire state.
I know it's sad to think that we can't devote more people to that, but from that chat spurred an introduction to a group that he is affiliated with called Guardian Group. And we're going to bring their COO, Nate, onto the show today, along with one of his coworkers, Andrea. So
I'm really excited about this one.
Too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we just jump right into it and get him on the line? Should we give him a call?
Let's do it.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Hello.
Hey, Nate.
Hey, Steve. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing fine.
Awesome. Hey, is Andrea on the phone as well?
She is.
I am.
Awesome.
Hi.
Hey, Andrea, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Nate, give us your background, and then Andrea, we'd love to hear more about you and what you guys do for a living on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, sure. So I recently retired from the Army. Spent nearly 26 years serving in Army Special Operations. And my wife and I were moving to Central Oregon, and I was looking for work, and I knew a couple people that were already working here at the Guardian Group. So started a conversation with them. And really for me, it was more about wanting to continue to do something that mattered, that I found some worth in, rather than just working for a paycheck or, chasing money or, whatever people do when they get out of the service, which, can vary pretty widely. So I talked to Jeff Keith, the CEO here, a few times, moved out here in February, and started as the Chief Operating Officer in April. And for me, it's been really good, right? It's something that I get up and do every day because I like the people I work with. I still enjoy what I'm doing, and I find some value, I think, for the community in doing this work. So that's how I got here. My military background, I'm a career Army Special Forces officer. My last assignment was as commander of 3rd Special Forces Group. So got to the rank of colonel before I retired, and now I'm really enjoying doing this. It's been a good transition.
Wow.
Thanks for your service.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And Andrea, what's your story?
Not nearly as cool. No, so my background is in adolescent counseling and teaching. And I heard one of the Guardian Group guys speak about 5 years ago. And he just shared about this crime and how it was happening right here in the U.S. And I sat there and was like, how the heck can I help him do what he's doing? And harassed them enough until they gave me a job. And I've been here for about 4.5 years since then. And I work as the team's marketing director, and then I also am one of our trainers. So I go out and talk to different sectors about what this crime looks like and how to identify it and how to report it.
Wow, that's awesome. And then give us the spiel on who Guardian Group is, how they operate, what their purpose is, so that we can kind of, I guess, identify who they are and what they're about.
Yeah. So, the Guardian Group is a nonprofit that's been around since 2010, has been here in Bend the whole time. And was started by a guy named Jeff Keith, who is still our CEO. And the vision was, Jeff was a pastor who transitioned to doing this because of what he saw while he was doing work overseas. And the fact that, there's women and children being taken advantage of all the time, right? Mm-hmm. So how do we do something about that? And today what the Guardian Group is still very much in the vein of helping women and children who are being trafficked for sex get out of that environment. And so we do that in a couple of ways, right? Offensively, we do that by employing retired military intelligence analysts to actually locate these girls, these women who are being trafficked, and then they develop a lead that they pass to a willing law enforcement entity, and the law enforcement really acts on that. So we do that routinely, think 3-4 leads a day across the United States. And that really is focused about 50% here in Oregon, and then the other half of our effort spread out across really about 11 locations in the U.S. So everything from the East Coast to Midwest, Pacific Northwest. And we're always looking to expand into new opportunities across the U.S. And then defensively, the training that we provide, and that's training for law enforcement to be able to do this same thing themselves, or to be able to identify the activities, training to communities, training to various groups that are interested in it, hospitals, that type of thing. That's the other sort of side to the coin of the Guardian Group. So we take a two-pronged approach to doing this. And the offensive side, I think, gives us the standing to be able to do the education and the defensive side. Did you want to add anything?
No, I think you covered it. Okay.
Awesome. So when it comes to educating, Andrea, I'm sure, all of this is education, right? I remember thinking on our last episode, talking to Chad, that it's like, why isn't this just foundational knowledge in EMS curriculum, firefighting curriculum?
Right.
Is it talked
even
about
day
in the
day.
police world?
Yeah.
Like, is it more? Do you guys find that it's more in like a basic police academy? Do you find it? Is it present there, or is this just kind of this like dark underworld that doesn't really get talked about?
I think it's becoming more of a topic.
Mm-hmm.
I would say when Guardian Group started back in 2010, one of the things that our founder discovered when he started looking at how the U.S. was approaching this crime was that people didn't know anything about it, and they weren't talking about it. And there's even some research from years ago that show that only less than 20% of law enforcement officers had human trafficking training. That was about 6-7 years ago that research came out. And so that's something that he really wanted to change, is how can we tell people about this crime, but more than just the awareness side, the like actual proactive, how do you step in and identify it and report it? And then if you're on the other side, if you're on the law enforcement side, how do you take a proactive approach to combating this crime? Mm-hmm. So I think it's something that's now being talked about a lot more than it used to be. I know that if you have to do an EMT refresher course, it's now a like optional topic that whoever's teaching can include, whereas it didn't used to be. I think that's as of the last 2 years, they're now including that as an optional thing.
Mm-hmm. And then do you find, I guess, one of the things I want to talk to you guys about today is what can EMS and fire be looking for? But I guess where do you want to start with that? Because that's a really big, question for you guys. What would be the introductory, or like how do you approach this subject when you guys first walk into a classroom? I guess let's assume we're in the classroom and we need to, we've just introduced you guys and you're going to talk about human trafficking today. Where do we go from there in the conversation?
Knowing that we don't know very much about it.
This is new to everybody.
Yeah, I think the best place to start is to address the fact that, like, stereotypically how we expect this crime to look, how movies like Taken or Pretty Woman portray it, is very inaccurate. Mm-hmm. A lot of times we want this to look a certain way, like girls chained up in cages, or this only existing on the deep dark web. And unfortunately, that's not at all the case. This is very public. It's walking down the streets that all of us are on. we've had cases here in Bend where the girl gets picked up right in our downtown where we all, hang out and walk around. So I think that's the first thing that people need to understand is that this crime is happening in broad daylight. And if you know what to look for, you're going to see it. And we need to get rid of the stereotypical kind of things that we expect this crime to look like, because that's not generally how it's happening.
Hey, Andrea, quick question for you. So let's take that scenario, downtown Bend. Can you walk me through like a timeline? So the time that I guess you'd call him sex trafficker meets the girl to when she's actually working, what happens in between there?
Yeah, so it can look a lot of different ways. Every trafficker kind of has their own unique style of manipulation and luring and recruitment. And in this certain scenario, we had the opportunity to speak with this trafficker after he got caught and did some time. And one of the questions we asked is, how did you identify that she was had a vulnerability or was somebody that you could exploit? And his method was to hang out where teens hung out. So here it was downtown, at the river, in front of the Dutch Bros Coffee, the movie theater, as well as in front of our runaway and homeless youth shelter. And he would go up to two girls and say, "Wow, you're beautiful." And the one that looked down or got instantly embarrassed, and he could visibly see that low self-esteem, that insecurity, he knew that he could break her.
Wow.
So in that case, that was the method. And then he just went from there in befriending her, saying, "Hey, my friends and I are going to a concert. Do you girls want to come?" She ended up going. Her friend backed out at the last minute. And the next thing she knew, she was in LA.
Jeez.
That happened very quickly. It can take that process from like recruitment through grooming to the point where they're broken into the life or into being trafficked. Can take anywhere from a couple days to about 4 months.
Wow. Even so, that's a really fast timeline.
That's super fast.
Yeah.
Very fast. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you guys deal with this stuff and see this stuff play out and even sit in the same room as someone as this guy and like, I don't know, I want to take a bath right now. And I think I said this with Chad on the phone on the last time we chatted with him. It's like this just it's so
uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable, it's gross, and I think the fact that it's you kind of just want to stop talking about it is like I'm feeling that right now.
And I think that's what the problem is, right?
And that's what the problem is, right?
We want to walk away and start talking about let's go to the beach or something.
Yeah, let's go talk about the cool call we had last night, or go get coffee and chat about something that's comfortable.
Right.
This is so uncomfortable.
And
that's why it's in the shadows.
And that's why we have these guys on today.
Yeah. Well, all right, we just figured it out.
Yeah. I think your question really speaks to the professionalism of people that take this on, and I'm not talking about us. I'm really talking about the first responders, right? They're the ones that get face-to-face with traffickers, girls that are victims, and they have to see this process all the way through, not just from the aspect of prosecuting a trafficker, but also caring for a person who has taken on such a trauma, right? And that leaves its mark on them as well. And you can't forget about that. For us, I would say that we are employing people who have made careers out of very difficult things. So the vast majority of the folks here are former military.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, part of the aspect of it is ensuring that they're not taking on too much, that they're not holding on to it, that they can leave and, go be a husband and a father or a mother and a wife. That it doesn't become an all-consuming thing, and if it looks like they need help, then there's an aspect of us having to get them the care they need as well. And you hear that discussed with first responders also, but frankly, that's another very difficult conversation that nobody wants to have, so they move on to other things. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
No, it does.
Yeah.
Moving on because
it's also really fascinating because it has always been sort of like you said, like the deep dark underground, and all we really have exposure to as normal people is these movies, like you said, Andrea. That's what we think it's like, and having the education for all of us as lay people, as EMS people, as parents, as kids. I have my 13-year-old here with me today. How do we bring this out to the light? And is that like, as your mission to educate people, how far does that go? Are you doing, you said EMS, police? Are you?
Yeah, so we basically anyone that will listen to us. But we definitely focus on the people that are going to see this crime most often. So the hospitality industry, the healthcare industry, with the exception of last year, we kind of took a little bit of a hiatus from training in the hospital.
Yeah.
First responders, law enforcement, parents, communities. We do offer an online training course that's just a basic intro for anybody that wants to understand this crime better. We do have that offering as well, whereas these other industries are a little bit more specialized as to how it will specifically interact with their industry.
Gotcha. So I've got some questions for you guys, and forgive us, these are kind of the ones I feel like are common questions you probably get asked. So my first one is, you talk about the jerk going up to these two girls and looking for specific signs or nonverbal language that are going to basically clue him into, oh yeah, I got this one. I can latch onto this one. Why don't they run? Why doesn't a victim run once, this guy who's groomed them, so to speak, like gets into the fact that, oh, I want you to go have sex with my quote unquote friend, or, however he approaches that topic. Like, what do you guys find is a common maybe situation or characteristic behind why these girls aren't just fleeing the second they get the chance?
Yeah, so there's this crime is super complex, and one of the things that happens is victims once they enter into the life, which is what a victim will refer to what's happening to her. She calls it the life. Once they enter into that, there's a lot of trauma that happens, a lot of very complex trauma. The only thing that they really compare it to is PTSD and combat veterans. And when you've experienced that kind of trauma, your brain no longer functions the same way. You're just in survival mode. Where am I going to eat? Where am I going to sleep? Am I going to be safe? And so once victims get to this point, and it can happen very quickly. I mean, it can be their initial introduction into the life, can be very violent, can be very traumatic, where they don't maybe have that opportunity to run ahead of time. And then they've experienced all this trauma, and now they're living in fear, or possibly their trafficker maybe has isolated them. He's taken their phone and their money and separated them from whatever their support group was if they had one, whether it's their friends or their family or whatever that was. He's isolated them in some way. Maybe he's moved them to a new city. You drop me off in Bend and I know where the police station is. I know where the hospital is. I know people I can call. You drop me off in Portland and I have no idea about any of those things. And so it's very isolating when they get moved. He maybe is going to make them, really doubt their situation. Just telling them all the time, you're just a prostitute now. You're worthless. Nobody will love you. Nobody will hire you. Your family's not going to take you back now. Things like that, constantly lying to them and making them doubt that people care is another tactic that's used to keep them around. But the big thing is the trauma. They get into this survival mode, and it's hard to do anything but survive once you've experienced that much trauma. So it's easy for us on the outside to look at it and say, oh, look, she's in a hotel room. Why doesn't she just call 911? Mm-hmm. Well, it's not that simple. She's just trying to survive the day. And if she doesn't think that there's any hope for her outside of this, then that gets much harder.
Mm-hmm. Is it kind of like the beaten wife?
One more time?
Is it kind of like the wife that gets abused by her husband over and over again?
Very much so, yeah. A lot of Stockholm syndrome associated with this, a lot of trauma bonding. Oftentimes, traffickers will build this emotional relationship with their victim where she thinks that he's her boyfriend and he loves her. And when we're talking about young, vulnerable victims, they're in love. They have this close relationship, they think, with their trafficker, and they don't totally understand that he's taking advantage. And so there's a lot of that, very similar to domestic violence.
And so if I remember correctly, Chad mentioned that the typical age range was like 11 to 17-ish. Is that correct?
Yeah, they say the average is about 15.
Okay. And so if that statistic exists, why then, we have a 13-year-old in our recording studio today. Like, I'm looking at her going, why isn't she being educated on this stuff in the school system? So can you guys explain that? Like, if you run into any walls when it comes to school districts, or what's the story there?
Yeah, so doing education in school districts is not something we do very often because there's quite a bit of regulation and requirement that comes along with that. So there are nonprofits that take that on and do that solely. The simple fact is, you guys talked about this earlier, right? It's an uncomfortable conversation. It's a conversation that has to be had. And if you talk to any parent and you ask them, what have you done on these topics, it probably is something that they will look at and say, I could do more, right? There's also the aspect of how are you not being invasive, but are you being protective? So what are you actually doing to ensure that your child, who probably now has unfettered access to the internet and a cell phone, how are they safe? And if you look back in 2020, you see the rise really in this crime and kids being trafficked. It's probably directly tied to the isolation through COVID and the fact that they're online more, right? And that's something we know now. But as an uncle, I ask, my brother and my sister-in-law, what are you doing? Are your kids' phones at all monitored? And routinely what I hear is, hey, it's wide open.
It's what?
Wide open. They've put no controls on their kids' access to the internet, which really means they could be talking to anybody. Mm-hmm. And so when I was growing up, my parents talked to me about whether or not I was going to approach a stranger and get in the car with them. And now we have the same thing that's virtual, or you're gonna have a running conversation with somebody that is not monitored by any adult you trust. And that's, I think, an aspect that has to be addressed going forward.
Sure. What do you guys have?
Just to add to that.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
The issue with the school system, if we think back to even getting sex education into the school system and how hard that was, this is an uphill battle. And unless there's parents advocating for this form of education, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What tools do you guys recommend or if you have any, that are good for monitoring or limiting, call them tweens, internet access or phone access?
Yeah, so there's a couple. So one is called Bark, BARK, and it is an app that will just allow you to see what your kids are doing online. And then the other one is Life 360, and it essentially kind of puts a geo bubble around your family so that you can kind of see where they are as far as where their phone is. That will help you keep track of them as well.
And how fast they're driving.
Yes. It will help with a lot of things.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things with online safety is just teaching kids, like Nate said, that stranger danger context in person. With COVID and the increase in predators trying to recruit online, teaching kids that, like, hey, if you get a message that says, hey, I need help, can you help me? Or somebody saying, looking for some kind of interaction, that they need to tell a trusted adult so that we can get those things reported.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that part of the problem might be like, my kids are raised, my youngest is 18 now, and I always thought, oh boy, nothing's going to happen to my kids. They're good kids. I'm a good dad. So we have this parental ignorance, like, you know, I'm not in a, you know, a poor neighborhood. I don't, you know, I'm married. It's not a single mom raising the kid. So it's not going to happen to my kid. Do you see that could be an obstacle as well in the education where, I mean, this is something that happened to anybody.
Yeah, it's, you know, I think a good deal of this is about considering not the child, but about the people that are trying to approach them.
Mm-hmm.
So your children can be as educated and well socialized and confident, and if someone is trying to set them up to have the belief that you know, they ought to go with them, or they're in love with them, or whatever, there's always that possibility. And Dre, I'd ask you to talk about the maturity of the brain and how that really affects how we're thinking. But the reality is, I think we're only typically focusing on one side of this, and we're not focusing on the trafficker who's trying to build a relationship with the child in order to take advantage of them. And if you just think about that, you know, what's gone on online with bruises, you know, over the years in order to make money off of people. How are people now utilizing the internet in order to make money off of large corporations, right? There's all these elaborate setups.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's a whole lot different when you look at trying to build a relationship with somebody in order to take advantage of them. It's just a matter of why they're doing it.
Gotcha. I think that's interesting. You know, we are sitting here thinking about the characteristics of the victim, right, and we're not even considering the characteristics of the abuser.
Right.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is that? You know, like,
I think it's because we can't control the abuser.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to do it, but maybe we could educate or enlighten the victims so they don't become victims. For me, anyway, It feels like we have more control over that than the vast majority of people that are out there being the abusers.
So can you speak to, and this would probably help EMS and fire, like who is the typical abuser in terms of their makeup, their background, what their, you know, speech
so
is
there's
like?
there's no profile for a trafficker.
Mm-hmm.
Every race, every socioeconomic status. I mean, we've seen it as young as 18-year-old kids exploiting their classmates in this manner. So it is hard to identify who would potentially be an abuser in this scenario. And in some places, it's generational. You know, they were raised this way. It's cultural.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a little bit tricky to just put a profile on this type of person.
Yeah.
If I'm an EMS provider, then obviously we would come in contact with the victim, not necessarily the abuser, or maybe we would, but we wouldn't notice. What kinds of things could we be looking for in our patients that might signal us that something weird is going on?
Yeah, so we can give you a whole list of different indicators to look for. Your patient may not be in control of their personal items. So maybe somebody else has their purse or their money or their ID.
Man, that's huge.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
They may have multiple phones, computers, or sex-related items. So if you're thinking like, okay, motor vehicle accident, and you notice in the car there's a bunch of computers and 3 cell phones, and there's a bag of, you know, condoms and lube that feels really out of place, that may be an indicator. They could be in a hotel room or in an Airbnb or wherever you're responding, but quite a bit of that stuff. When you're speaking to your patient, their story may sound really inconsistent or scripted. And if you ask questions about their injury, oftentimes they're rehearsed. So they're trained to speak to different people in certain ways. They're, you know, if you get stopped by the cops, this is what you say. If you get into a hotel, this is what you tell the front desk. And so when you start to ask questions outside of what the script is that they've been given, they may become really hostile with you and not want medical attention, not want your help, because you're starting to ask questions that they don't have an answer to. And remember, they're in this survival mode. And so they don't want to give you any reason to think that there's something going on. If you respond to like an apartment or a house or an Airbnb and you notice that there's just mattresses on the floor, there's no beds, or there's just a real lack of furniture, or there's a lot of people living in the space, like more than should be there, that could be indicators that there's trafficking. If there's a lot of security that feels really unusual, so locks on doors, or even security in the form of like muscle and people standing outside the location. It's a little bit more common in bigger cities than like we would see here in Bend. But places like Portland, that could be more of an indicator. There may be signs of substance abuse with your patient, but there also might not be. Some traffickers use substances to control their victims. So like, you come home with $500 tonight and you'll get your fix. Whereas others don't, because remember, they're selling these girls as a product and they want her to be able to perform. So some don't use substance, but some do. So there may be some signs of that. You may notice tattoos. They're used as brands. So in the same way that like Nike and Adidas put their brand on things to deconflict their product, traffickers do the same thing. So the tattoo may be a crown or some, sign that she's for sale, whether it's a money sign or the words for sale or his name. You may notice some tattoos. She may have some other injuries, some older bruising or burns or cuts, but these may not be in places that you would think about. A survivor friend of mine shared that she always got hit in the back of the head, right at the base of her neck, because her hair would cover up the bruising. Because again, they're being sold for a product. And their traffickers want them to look a certain way. So their injuries may be kind of hidden.
What kind of body language are we looking at for both the abuser and the person who's being abused?
Yeah, so oftentimes they'll be really nervous, afraid, depressed. The big indicator, especially if you're a male provider, they won't make eye contact with you. They're going to stare drastically at the ground and avoid that eye contact at all costs. So that's anytime we train and then someone calls a couple weeks later if they've seen it and we ask like, okay, what'd you see? What indicator gave it away? The real big avoidance of eye contact is usually the first thing. And they may be with someone who seems really controlling, and this person might not be a man. So they're, and I don't remember if Chad shared this in his, but they're oftentimes traffickers use what they refer to as the bottom. And this is their most trusted girl, and she's oftentimes given the job of helping them recruit or helping control the other girls. So she may be the one that's answering your questions or in control of the victim's items or anything like that. And she probably will step in and speak over the victim if given the opportunity.
Wow,
man!
How do you graduate to that position?
Work with them for years, probably.
Right. And now,
and I think it's hard. Of the survivors that I know that have played the role of bottom, that's the thing that they can't get over, is that they help exploit other people. But oftentimes the deal is like, you recruit or you control and you sleep with less buyers. So she's getting raped less often if she's willing to exploit other girls. And so I think that's the hardest thing for them to deal with later.
Do they feel like they're the number one girl that's, I don't know, girlfriend or however you'd say it, to the
pimp?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, typically.
So one question I've got for you is, and I don't know if it's necessary to draw this line, but I'm trying to clarify something in my brain. Trafficking isn't necessarily prostitution, but it oftentimes is. Wait a minute. No, I said that backwards. Prostitution. Shucks.
Right. There you go.
I'm like,
Oh, man. Well, Steve, have you been listening at all? So prostitution isn't necessarily trafficking, but trafficking is prostitution.
Right. So some people choose to be sex workers on their own, not under duress.
Right.
That's right. So there are certainly willing sex workers out there, and there's legislation being introduced here in Oregon in order to maybe legalize that or not prosecute the prostitute who is working for herself, but still go after the trafficker or the John. And it's this gets back to the long-held belief, which I think is a misnomer, which is that this is a victimless crime, right? There are certainly people who do this of their own free will. But I think what we would commonly say is that's a person who is older, more mature, is making that decision for himself or herself. Trafficking and trafficking of a minor are two things that, still
Totally.
are completely different. And also just prosecuting a trafficker very difficult for law enforcement because they have to prove some elements where trafficking of a minor is much easier to prove. And so you also see really a struggle there within law enforcement and district attorneys about how to approach that.
Mm-hmm.
So Nate, when you guys get a call, can you describe like what you do? It sounds like I know that you employ a lot of retired military. You said that have a lot of maybe cybersecurity background or know-how. What do you guys do? How do you disseminate the work, and then what goes on behind the scenes?
Yeah, so we get a number of calls, and we do some or most of this ourselves. So I guess the easiest way to describe it is on a day-to-day basis, the folks that are doing the analysis really come in, get online, and start going through ads that are posted online for girls that are being advertised for sex, right? And there's a number of pages that are hosted outside the U.S. now where that's done. And it's geographically. So if you want to look at, hey, I'll be in Portland for the week and I'd like to meet a girl and have sex, then I can look at these advertisements and set that up. So that's what they look at. And from that, then we've got to determine, well, is this actually who this person is or not? And then if we can determine their actual identity and age, then we can build a lead and send that to the local law enforcement who takes that on. Mm-hmm. That's one way to do it. That's probably the most often thing that we do on a daily basis. The other way that it happens is either a parent of a girl that's missing will call us or law enforcement will call us. And those conversations can be, hey, my daughter's been missing for 5 weeks. Can you take a look at the following and just let me know if you think she's okay or if she's being trafficked? I haven't heard from her. That was a call I got 2 weeks ago. Another, the law enforcement angle is the police are either going to conduct operations and they need leads in order to do that, or they want us to look at a specific individual. And so this really gets into finding the person and determining is that actually who they are, and then are they being trafficked or not. So that takes, for one analyst to really work through all that, it's about 4 hours, sometimes much more, sometimes quicker. It depends on, all of the things about the internet, right? How much have they obscured who they are? How thorough have they been? Have they tied any of their true name, used, phone numbers, email addresses, social media accounts to their work accounts, that kind of thing. So it takes some time, but that's how we do the offensive part of this.
And so Nate, just to clarify, because I know that there are multiple, I don't know what you call them, groups, or really they're kind of seen as vigilantes, so to speak, of people that are doing this without the law enforcement side, and they're really they're going into communities and, getting tips or leads or whatever, and then they're taking all of this on themselves and not including law enforcement.
Yep.
I don't know what to call those groups, but I know that from the other people I've spoken with, they're causing sometimes more problems than, situations they're helping. So you guys are obviously involving law enforcement and helping them generate leads for cases and solve those things. You guys aren't out running amok with your marked cars and taking this on yourself, correct?
That's correct. No, we try to stay on the right side of the law on this. And there's certainly plenty of media out there discussing other organizations and what they do, and whether or not that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I would say that, if I would say there are two things we don't do. One is we don't break the law, and two is we don't take any of these matters into our own hands. Mm-hmm. So we work through law enforcement entirely in order to recover a victim and help the prosecution of a trafficker. That's really what we're doing. And it's interesting because when a new officer at Bend PD shows up, he comes in here and, this is my second week on the job, and I'm talking to this guy about the fact that we don't do that, right? Mm-hmm. So there's still very much, I think, a lot of myth or lore that surrounds some of this. Mm-hmm. And, Dre mentioned, movies and how they portray one thing. This is not, in fact, what goes on. And I think we're going to work through that as long as that seems to be the thing that's portrayed in the media or in the movies, right? You'll always be answering the question of, well, yeah, but do you guys do this yourselves? For us, the answer is no, we don't.
So just to confirm, you're not Liam Neeson going into other countries, kidnapping the kidnapped and taking them back home.
Well, he cannot confirm or deny that. He was special ops for however many years.
Yeah. No, the office is very boring. There's a bunch of people sitting
bunch of computer nerds.
And, that's the extent of, yeah.
I've never wanted to be a computer nerd more in my life than I do right now. Like, that could be my life's work.
There's got to be a lot of satisfaction, though, in putting away some of these people that you guys are building cases on. And obviously we don't want to talk specifics, but what have some successful cases for you guys looked like once you guys have formed kind of that, the leads that law enforcement needs?
Well, I will start by saying that it is often, 18 or 24 months before we really know the outcome. So, for us, this is about the victim being successfully removed from the situation and the trafficker being prosecuted. And when you start to talk about that aspect of it, you run into a whole host of legalities, right? And
yeah.
This is not a diatribe on why that should or shouldn't be the case. The simple fact is it is. And so there is a long period of time where we don't know the outcome. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we will not go back to law enforcement and ask. So typically when things are concluded, the DA or the police officers involved will reach out to us. But, as you guys know, prosecutions take a long time to come all the way to conclusion. So when we look at our numbers, we look at numbers of leads passed, and then we can go back historically and look at, okay, how did this one really turn out? Oftentimes, though, frankly, we really don't know. Mm-hmm. And we don't know because we don't want to put law enforcement in the position of not being able to do the prosecution.
Right.
So there's all of that. The reality is, I think for us, success looks a lot like having a good law enforcement partnership, and then having a willing partner that reaches out to us when they need help and uses the help that we can provide. And that's about the best case scenario for us, right? So we'll never fully know, okay, these activities in these cities resulted in the following prosecutions. Mm-hmm. And for a bunch of folks who really tied their careers to, being in the military and mission success, that's a little bit of a change.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But in the end, I think it's something we all recognize. We're not going to put law enforcement in the position of compromising the case in order for us to be able to tell people that support us or our donors, hey, here's how many prosecutions we got this year. So we go ahead.
I was going to say that Chad multiple times has said he could not do his job without you.
Yeah.
Multiple times. And I think that's so awesome that there's this group of people that want to use their skills for this specific cause.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I think we're all pretty proud of. And the reality is, when you talk to local law enforcement officers, they're wildly understaffed for the amount that they have to take on, so they have to make very hard decisions. And a lot of this comes down to the policeman on the day at the time deciding what he or she is going to be able to do, and then support through the end. And so, like Central Oregon, I'm told, has one intel analyst for the entirety of Central Oregon for all of the crimes that are committed. Wow. So when you just think about the scale there,
huge.
The police departments are really struggling to be able to take on the full measure of this and see it all the way through, and that's unfortunate. So we're proud to be able to help fill some of that gap for them.
So
I think Chad even shared he's the only detective in Oregon where this is his full-time job in the whole state.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
So incredible.
So I got a couple questions for you. First off, what is the percentage of female versus male victims?
So it's really hard to answer for a couple reasons. One, this crime is pretty poorly studied and researched overall. And two, we know with any sexual assault that the male population underreports.
Right. Okay.
So from our experience, it's predominantly female.
Right.
But beyond that, it's really hard to put a specific number to it.
Okay. All right. Second question.
And I would say, just since I've been here since April, I think I've only seen 2 cases that were male that we worked on.
Okay.
But of course, neither of them had reached out or were looking for help. Right. These were other people that were reaching out on their behalf. And the underreporting on, sort of male sexual assault and all that kind of stuff. That is going to be something that, society is going to have to take on for years in order to destigmatize, because it's really that bad.
All right. Second question. As an EMS provider, what do I, if I suspect it, I mean, obviously if I suspect child abuse or elder abuse, I mean, I'm supposed to report that. If I have any suspicion, what steps do I go through as an EMS provider to report that?
So exactly like you would report child abuse or domestic violence. I mean, it falls into the same categories. So if you suspect it, get law enforcement involved. Tell them why you suspect trafficking. If you're passing that patient off to the emergency department, share your concerns with the emergency department, because they may start to notice other indicators as well, and starting to build on that story. Okay, so you noticed 3 things when you pick the patient up and your gut says something's wrong. You tell the emergency department and they notice 4 more things. Now we have more of a case that we can start to support law enforcement with. And then, talking to your medical director about what the policy is around trafficking, so that everybody knows what to look for and what to do. But same thing as child abuse and domestic violence and elder abuse, it falls into that same category.
Okay. Thank you.
I was just going to say, as a parent of a teen that didn't grow up with technology, it's good to know, like, why are they so susceptible to these traffickers? Like,
is there a physiological component behind it, or is it just, trauma from growing up that leads them down this path? Like
curiosity. What?
Yeah. So there's a couple things. We're talking about 15-year-olds on average, and their frontal cortex, so the part of your brain that's not responsible, or that is responsible for your decision making, it's not fully developed. That doesn't happen for years. And in fact, your decision making is more being fueled by the emotional part of your brain. And so, we hear things, we get, hit with these different scams, and we're like, yeah, that's a joke. This guy's not really offering me a modeling job or a role in a music video. But to a 15-year-old, that decision-making part, that logic part, it's just not developed yet. And then if you think about what every 15-year-old girl wants, she wants to be loved, she wants to be accepted, she wants to be popular, to have a boyfriend. Things along those lines make them much more susceptible to this type of predator, who's just trying to find that vulnerability that he can exploit. And so oftentimes our young people post so much of their heart and soul on the internet these days. So if she posts, "My mom's the worst," or "School sucks," that allows a predator to get in there and to fix that problem. Your mom sucks, so does mine. I, moved out at 15 and look how good I'm doing. I dropped out of school. You don't need school. I'll take care of you.
Yeah.
Allows them to kind of start to fill that gap. And when their brain just isn't functioning, at the level that an adult brain is, just because developmentally they're not there, it makes it harder for them to see the risk in that. Instead, they're running off that emotional brain, and they're like, "Oh, this sounds fun. This sounds better than my current situation. He seems fine. He seems safe. He loves me."
And we would
when in
typically
reality,
call
that's
that,
not the case.
yeah, and we would typically call that like immaturity, right? Like that's kind of the easy way for parents to categorize that. But there's really a physiological component of the brain growth happening that is going to affect the way they can think through this, more than just past this emotional moment, right? Like, well, I really don't want to be doing that,
right
down, in a week,
Yeah.
but
And they're so used to being codependent. I mean, they depend on their providers for food, money, clothes, everything. And so it seems like that trauma bond would be really easy to form when it comes to, you do this for me, even though I'm mean to you, I'm going to give this back to you. And then emotionally, they're really invested.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and I think too, like if you, for any parent that potentially thinks that their kid's being groomed, I think going at it from, hey, this behavior isn't okay, instead of this person isn't safe, will speak to them a little bit better, because again, remember, they're falling in love with this person, or they think this person cares about them. So speaking negatively about the person is not going to get you anywhere with them, versus pointing out, hey, this behavior isn't normal, is really, really kind of a better approach to take, and giving them the space to say, hey, I don't agree with this decision. I don't agree with you talking to them. But not giving them an ultimatum or creating any kind of wedge is going to protect them in the future, because it doesn't allow the trafficker to step in. Oh, your parents took your cell phone away? I'll get you a cell phone. Something like that. That ultimatum of, if you keep talking to them, I'll take your phone or I'll take your car or whatever, allows them to solve a problem. So really focusing on why the behavior isn't okay versus the person will go a long way with that 15-year-old brain.
That's really good. Thank you.
That's awesome. Well, we're already at an hour for the most part here, so we've got to wrap it up. But one thing I did want to touch base on, I know you guys are a 501c3, and I know that Guardian Group's mission, taken right off their website, is to prevent and disrupt the sex trafficking of women and children while enabling partners to identify victims and predators in the United States. And so I think your guys' mission is very, very much worthwhile supporting. And so if any of our listeners want to give or donate, how can they do that for you guys?
Yeah, there's a donate portion on our website. They can do monthlies, they can do a one-time. There are a number of ways that are explained there on how they can donate. And if they want to just help, there are always opportunities that we have for people to help with communities, to help with training, to help gather the community in order to do some of these types of things that we've talked about. So there's a number of sort of venues that are on the website.
Okay, and that's guardiangroup.org, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. Well, Andrea and Nate, thank you guys so much for your time and for really for what you guys do and for educating us.
Yes, absolutely.
I know that I've taken home a few pearls, so to speak, that are going to help me with my assessments on scene and just looking at the bigger picture of scene safety and, looking beyond the patient complaint and what's going on with them and seeing if there's really something else going on. But again, thank you guys for what you do and for Guardian Group. And yeah, you guys are awesome. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks very much.
All right. You guys have a good one, and we'll catch everybody on the next episode.